Imagine looking into the eyes of the man accused of murdering your husband and whispering, "I forgive you." The very words that would shatter a room built on rage, grief, and vengeance, delivered not in a trembling whisper, but with the steadiness of someone who had stared into the abyss and chosen light instead of darkness. The courtroom was silent. Even the scratch of a reporter's pen paused mid-sentence, as if language itself struggled to keep up with the weight of the moment. A sea of eyes turned toward Erika Kirk, the widow, the mother, the woman who should have been consumed by fury. Instead, she became the vessel of something unthinkable. The cameras clicked, desperate to freeze this instant, but no lens could capture the enormity of what had just been spoken. For weeks, the nation had waited for this trial, their hunger for spectacle sharpened by headlines that framed Erika as the broken, grieving widow. They expected an outpouring of condemnation. They expected righteous anger. They expected the human story we've been told time and again, pain answered by punishment. But what came instead was something that made even the most hardened skeptics sit up straighter. "I forgive him." 3 words. And in those 3 words, the air shifted. Some gasped. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered prayers under their breath, as if they had witnessed something holy. The accused sat frozen, unable to mask the confusion on his face. How does one respond when the very person you are accused of destroying refuses to meet hate with hate? Across the country, millions would later replay this clip, over and over, searching for meaning. Was it faith? Was it madness? Was it the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be defined by tragedy? Whatever the answer, Erika Kirk had not only seized the courtroom's attention, she had claimed the attention of the entire nation. Because forgiveness, in a moment when vengeance seemed justified, is not just surprising, it is revolutionary. And when Erika spoke those words, she set in motion a ripple effect that no one could stop. The murder of Erika Kirk's husband was not just another crime splashed across late-night news segments. It was the kind of story that burrowed into the marrow of a country already aching with division. Her husband, a man known for his work, his family, his presence in the community, had been ripped from the world by a single violent act. The shock reverberated not just through his family, not just through his town, but through every corner of a nation that has learned to live with tragedy, yet never grows numb to the cruelty of it. For Erika, the nights were long and cruel. There were the questions from her children, eyes searching hers for answers she didn't have. There were the endless court dates, each one reopening the wound. And there was the loneliness, the kind that creeps into every room of your home, whispering that the life you built has been irreparably shattered. Grief like this doesn't just sit quietly. It claws, it burns, it demands vengeance as its only salve. And vengeance was exactly what much of America expected. Commentators sharpened their takes. Editorials were drafted before the trial had even begun. Would Erika call for the harshest punishment possible? Would she speak of the need for justice, for an eye for an eye? This was the script America had seen before, the script it knew by heart. Pain answered with punishment, fury answered with fury. But Erika's story unfolded against the backdrop of a nation already torn apart by clashing visions of justice. One half demanded retribution, swift and merciless, as proof that order still had teeth. The other half wrestled with a radical question. Could forgiveness, even in the face of unbearable loss, offer a path forward? In a political climate where mercy is often mistaken for weakness, the very possibility seemed outrageous. Yet here it was, simmering beneath the surface, embodied in a grieving woman few outside her community had ever heard of until tragedy thrust her onto the national stage. Cable networks treated the trial like a prize fight. Hashtags trended. Families argued in living rooms, in workplaces, in church pews. This was no longer the Kirks' private sorrow. It was a mirror reflecting America's soul. And when Erika stepped into that courtroom, the stakes could not have been higher. This was not just about a husband lost, or about an alleged killer on trial. This was about the narrative America tells itself when confronted with its deepest wounds. Would the nation once again choose the well-worn path of vengeance? Or would it be forced to reckon with something harder, something less satisfying to the part of us that craves payback, the possibility of radical grace? The moment Erika opened her mouth, it wasn't simply her voice filling the chamber. It was the weight of history, culture, and identity pressing down on every syllable. For some, she would become a saint, a symbol of faith that transcended politics. For others, she would become a target, criticized for undermining the very notion of justice. Either way, her words would ignite a firestorm that no jury verdict could contain. Because what happens next isn't just about one widow's decision. It isn't just about one family's heartbreak. It's about the soul of a nation already fractured, already searching for meaning in the face of relentless violence. Erika's choice would force America to look in the mirror and decide what kind of people we really want to be. The man accused of killing Erika Kirk's husband did not stumble into that courtroom from nowhere. His story, like so many others that end in violence, was a chain of choices, failures, and fractures. From the outside, he looked like the perfect embodiment of chaos. A life splintered by addiction, petty crime, and a bitterness that seemed to eat him alive. But peel back the layers, and a different picture begins to emerge. A portrait of someone who allowed every disappointment, every setback, to calcify into rage. He was born into instability. Friends recall a boy always searching for belonging, always chasing a sense of worth that never seemed to materialize. Teachers described him as bright but restless, quick to lash out, quicker to quit. He drifted from school to the streets, finding in gangs and drugs a counterfeit version of family, one that demanded loyalty but gave nothing in return. As years passed, his name became a familiar one to police reports, attached to thefts, assaults, and more than one stint behind bars. But the defining trait of his life wasn't just the crimes he committed, it was the posture he carried toward the world. A permanent sneer, as if daring anyone to challenge him, a conviction that the world had cheated him, and that the only way to claw back dignity was through intimidation, control, and destruction. If Erika's husband represented quiet strength, dedication, and love of family, this man represented the opposite: volatility, absence, and self-sabotage. By the time the fatal night arrived, his trajectory had long been set. He had severed ties with nearly everyone who tried to help him. He saw enemies in every shadow, conspiracies in every kind gesture. To the nation, he would quickly become a villain, a headline image of everything broken in American life. Yet even as the cameras painted him as irredeemable, his own choices made the case clearer than any broadcaster could. This was not simply a man who lashed out in a moment of passion. This was someone who had cultivated destruction as a way of being, and yet to humanize him is not to excuse him. He was more than a monster, but also less than a man willing to take responsibility for his choices. He carried with him not just the burden of one crime, but the weight of a life spent running from accountability. In that sense, he became more than himself. He became a symbol. For some, he was the personification of violence festering in neglected neighborhoods, proof that society had failed to heal its wounds. For others, he was simply evil incarnate, an example of what happens when hate is left unchecked. Placed against the backdrop of Erika's calm, his turmoil became even starker. Where she radiated composure, he radiated instability. Where she embodied dignity, he embodied disdain. Every twitch of his jaw in that courtroom, every glare toward the jury, only deepened the contrast. It was as if the universe had staged this confrontation, grace sitting across from bitterness, light holding steady against darkness. But Erika's words of forgiveness weren't just remarkable because they were unexpected. They were remarkable because of who they were spoken to. To forgive a repentant soul is one thing. To forgive someone who offers no apology, no recognition of the life he shattered, is something entirely different. It was this imbalance, the serenity of the widow facing the chaos of the accused, that burned itself into the nation's memory. His story is one of spirals downward, from promise to frustration, from frustration to anger, from anger to violence. And in many ways, America has seen this story before. He is not the first to embody what happens when bitterness is left to rot unchecked, and he will not be the last. But what makes his story unforgettable is not his descent into darkness. It is the fact that Erika Kirk chose not to follow him there, because his life had been defined by rage, by control, by taking from others. And Erika, in one sentence, flipped the script. She offered something he had never given to anyone else: grace. She refused to become a mirror of his chaos, and in doing so, She turned his identity as villain into a backdrop for her own radical dignity. Long before Erika Kirk became a headline, before cameras sought her out and reporters memorized her name, she was simply Erika, the daughter of immigrants who instilled in her a sense of resilience that would one day become her lifeline. Her parents arrived in America with little more than determination, building a modest but loving home that placed faith at the center. They told their children that dignity was not granted by wealth or status, but by how one carried themselves in moments of hardship. From a young age, Erika absorbed that lesson. She was the quiet one in classrooms, the friend who listened more than she spoke, the person who offered encouragement when others wilted under pressure. Where others might have folded, Erika endured. She endured the snide comments about her background, endured the moments of doubt when opportunities seemed out of reach, endured the sting of being underestimated. Every obstacle became a silent rehearsal for the strength she would one day need in the most devastating moment of her life. It was during her college years that she met her future husband. Their love story was not the stuff of fairy tales, but something deeper, sturdier. They bonded over shared values, service, community, and a conviction that their lives should stand for something more than personal ambition. He admired her steadiness, the way she refused to let hardship define her. She admired his passion, his belief in fighting for what was right even when it was unpopular. Together they became more than partners. They became a team. Marriage and children only deepened that partnership. They built a home that was not wealthy in the material sense, but rich in laughter, rich in faith, rich in the kind of love that fills the gaps money can't. Their evenings were spent around the dinner table, their weekends at community events or with extended family. Erika's role as a mother became her proudest title. She was the one who stayed up late to help with homework, the one who reminded her children to be kind when classmates were cruel, the one who insisted that dignity meant treating others with compassion even when you were hurting. But life was not without its sacrifices. Erika's husband's work often demanded long hours, and she bore the brunt of balancing home, community, and her own quiet ambitions. She turned down opportunities that would have pulled her too far from her children, sacrificing recognition for stability. And yet she never spoke of these sacrifices as losses. To Erika, giving of herself was not weakness. It was a calling. It was what love demanded. Faith was her compass through it all. She believed in a God who met people in their suffering, who transformed pain into purpose. It was not a naive faith, nor a simplistic one. Erika knew suffering intimately. Miscarriages that left her reeling, bills that piled up in lean years, moments of exhaustion that made her question whether she had the strength to keep going. But each time she rose, each time she found in prayer and in community the energy to continue. Her husband's death was the ultimate test of that faith. One day, she was a wife planning the week ahead. The next, she was a widow fielding condolences she didn't want to hear. The news struck like a thunderclap, leaving her disoriented, hollowed out. The children cried themselves to sleep. Friends brought casseroles she couldn't taste. Reporters parked outside her home. The world expected her to collapse under the weight of it all. And yet, those who knew Erika saw something different. They saw the quiet strength that had always defined her, now magnified by the enormity of her loss. They saw a woman who refused to let bitterness consume her children's future. They saw someone who held onto her dignity as if it were oxygen. Erika did not deny her grief. She spoke openly about nights spent sobbing, about mornings when she could barely rise from bed. But she also spoke about her husband's legacy, about raising her children in a way that would make him proud, about believing that tragedy could not have the final word. In community gatherings, she urged others to hold their families tighter, to find common ground across divisions, to reject the temptation of cynicism. Slowly, she became more than just a grieving widow. She became a voice of resilience in a nation desperate for hope. It was precisely this combination, her immigrant roots, her sacrifices as a wife and mother, her tested but unbroken faith, that made Erika the perfect vessel for radical grace. She was not a celebrity polished for the cameras, not a politician spinning rhetoric. She was a woman whose strength had been forged in fire long before the cameras ever arrived. And when her moment came, she did not script her response for public approval. She spoke from the deepest well of who she was. That is why, in that courtroom, her words carried such gravity. They were not the rehearsed lines of someone chasing sympathy. They were the distilled essence of a life lived with resilience, with dignity, with compassion, that had been tested again and again. Erika Kirk, the immigrant's daughter, the devoted wife, the resilient mother, the woman of faith, became the face of something rare in American life. Forgiveness when every instinct screamed for revenge. The trial had already drawn a level of attention more commonly reserved for political scandals and celebrity implosions. Reporters packed the benches, their laptops glowing like watchful eyes, every keystroke a race to push updates into the bloodstream of a waiting nation. Outside the courthouse, demonstrators gathered with signs and chants, some demanding justice in its harshest form, others urging compassion, even for the accused. It was a spectacle, a collision of grief, politics, and performance. Inside, the prosecution spoke with fire. They painted the alleged killer as the embodiment of cruelty, a man who had wasted every chance at redemption, whose life had become a string of violent choices culminating in the ultimate crime. The prosecutor's voice cut like a blade. He did not stumble into tragedy, he chose it. Each word landed heavily, and the jurors' eyes stayed fixed on the figure slouched at the defense table. The defense countered with a different narrative, a man broken by circumstance, a victim of his own environment. They spoke of poverty, of failed institutions, of opportunities denied and futures erased. To them, this was not the story of pure evil, but of a system that produced desperation and violence. Their words were measured, almost mournful, attempting to draw sympathy without excusing the crime. The courtroom became a theater, every argument charged with more than legal weight. It was not just about guilt or innocence. It was about what story America would choose to believe. Was this man a monster beyond redemption, or a tragic product of neglect and despair? The tension was unbearable, and each side seemed to pull the air tighter, waiting for something or someone to break the silence. In the gallery, Erika sat with her children and family members, her posture straight but her face unreadable. To those watching, she was the one piece missing from the drama. What would she say? What would her testimony reveal? People projected their own expectations onto her. Some imagined a grieving widow demanding the harshest punishment, her voice trembling with righteous anger. Others anticipated bitterness, an outpouring of rage against the man accused of shattering her life. Every camera in the room seemed to angle toward her, as if they knew her words would be the climax, the quote replayed for days, maybe years. Behind that quiet composure was a storm of emotions only she could feel. The gravity of loss, the weight of raising her children without their father, the exhaustion of reliving tragedy under public scrutiny. She had heard the arguments, the tug-of-war over justice, and she knew the world expected her to take a side. Vengeance or mercy, rage or silence, there seemed to be no other option. The judge called for order, signaling the moment everyone had been waiting for. The hush was immediate, like the air itself bracing for impact. Erika rose slowly, each step echoing across the chamber, her hands clasped together, not in nervousness but in steadiness, as if anchoring herself to an unseen strength. The accused lifted his head to look at her, his expression unreadable, defiant, weary, perhaps even curious. Reporters leaned forward, fingers poised to transcribe history in real time. Family members held their breath. The nation watched through live broadcasts and instant clips, eager to dissect every syllable. In that moment, Erika stood at the crossroads of expectation. Every script written for her by pundits and strangers hung heavy in the air, the grieving widow who would demand blood, or the broken woman who would dissolve in rage. Either would have been understandable, predictable, even applauded, but Erika Kirk had never lived by other people's scripts, and so, as the silence stretched and the weight of history pressed down on her, she opened her mouth, but when she opened her mouth, the world heard something it had not prepared for. Section 6, the mic drop counterattack, 100 words. Her voice did not tremble. It did not falter. It did not rise in anger or crack under grief. When Erika Kirk spoke, she did so with the clarity of someone who had been preparing her entire life for this single moment. I forgive him. 3 words, simple, almost unremarkable on their own. Yet in that courtroom, charged with expectation and saturated with tension, they detonated like thunder. The silence that followed was not the polite quiet of a courtroom accustomed to solemnity. It was the kind of silence that swallows everything, that makes people aware of their own breathing, that forces them to wonder if they've truly heard what they just heard. The prosecutor blinked, stunned. The defense attorney shifted uneasily in his chair. Jurors glanced at one another, searching for confirmation that they weren't imagining things. And at the center of it all, Erika stood unwavering, her eyes not on the jury, not on the reporters, but on the man accused of taking her husband's life. "I cannot carry hate in my heart," she continued, her tone even, her words deliberate. "If I do, then my children inherit that hate. And I refuse to let them live under its shadow. What he did took someone from us that can never be replaced, but I will not let it take the rest of me too." The courtroom was riveted. Some tried to mask their disbelief with folded arms. Others stared openly, mouths parted. A woman in the gallery dabbed at tears. Even the judge leaned back slightly, as if the gravity of the statement pulled him into stillness. Erika paused. The silence gave her words space to breathe, to seep into the cracks of every hardened heart in the room. She was not offering a free pass to the accused. She was not excusing the crime. She was declaring something far more radical, that vengeance would not define her. The accused shifted in his seat. At first, his expression was blank, almost mocking, as though waiting for the sting of condemnation that never came. But as Erika's words unfolded, a flicker broke through. His shoulders sagged. His jaw loosened. For a moment, his eyes betrayed something that looked almost human. Confusion, vulnerability, perhaps even the first tremor of remorse. "You cannot undo what you've done," Erika said, her voice tightening just slightly, not from anger but from truth. "You cannot give my children back their father, but I can choose what story they will grow up telling. They will not say their mother was broken by hate. They will say she chose to forgive." It was not just a statement. It was a counterattack, a dismantling of hate without a raised voice or clenched fist. Where others would have wielded fury as their weapon, Erika wielded grace. And grace, in that moment, proved more devastating than rage could ever be. Reporters scrambled to keep up, their fingers flying across keyboards, trying to frame what had just happened in words that could travel the world. But no headline could capture the weight in the room, the dissonance of hearing forgiveness in a space that had been bracing for vengeance. On social media, the moment exploded instantly. Clips circulated within minutes, accompanied by captions like, "This is strength. I've never seen anything like this. Who forgives their husband's killer?" Some praised her as a saint, a beacon of faith and resilience. Others criticized her, saying forgiveness undermined justice, that grace offered too soon was grace wasted. But regardless of stance, everyone was talking about Erika Kirk. Her words had split the digital landscape into factions, igniting debates about justice, mercy, faith, and survival. In homes across America, families replayed the clip at their dinner tables, stunned. In churches, pastors quoted her statement before congregations who gasped in unison. On cable news, commentators raised eyebrows and voices, some hailing her as an icon of moral courage, others questioning whether forgiveness was even possible without accountability. But no one could deny the power of that moment. Erika had not raised her voice, yet it reverberated louder than any speech delivered that day. She had not called for punishment, yet her words struck like a verdict. In refusing to be defined by vengeance, she revealed just how small vengeance truly was. Back in the courtroom, Erika finished her statement not with theatrics, but with a stillness that commanded more attention than any outburst could. "I forgive him," she repeated, softer this time, almost as if speaking to herself. Then she turned, returning to her seat, her children's eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and awe. The accused sat frozen, head bowed, hands twitching as if he didn't know what to do with them. No smirk, no defiance, just a hollow stare at the floor, as though the ground itself might open and swallow him. The judge cleared his throat, struggling to bring the courtroom back to order, but the spell had already been cast. People knew they had witnessed something unforgettable, something beyond the legal framework of guilt and innocence. They had seen the impossible, forgiveness offered to the undeserving. In that instant, Erika Kirk transcended the role of grieving widow. She became a figure etched into the national imagination, a symbol of dignity that could not be broken, a reminder that true strength is not loud, not vengeful, but unyieldingly human. The world had braced for rage and instead received grace. And in that inversion lay the brilliance of her counterattack. Without raising her hand, without raising her voice, Erika had dismantled an entire narrative. The moment Erika Kirk's words left her lips, the courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It became the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. By the time she returned to her seat, the clip had already been clipped, subtitled, and catapulted into every corner of social media. Within minutes, hashtags trended across platforms. Radical forgiveness, strength in grace, Erika Kirk's. The image of her standing tall, eyes steady, saying "I forgive him" played on repeat, shared by millions who could not decide whether they were witnessing the bravest act imaginable or a betrayal of justice itself. Headlines the next morning screamed with equal parts awe and skepticism. Widow stuns courtroom with forgiveness. Grace in the face of murder. Did Erika Kirk go too far? Every outlet framed it differently, some hailing her as a moral giant, others questioning whether forgiveness so publicly offered would undercut the rule of law. The debate was no longer confined to hushed legal circles. It had spilled into the bloodstream of a divided nation. Cable commentators circled like vultures, each eager to claim the narrative. On one network, a panelist with tears in her eyes called Erika an angel walking among us, insisting that America needed more examples of courage like hers. On another, a stern-faced pundit thundered that her forgiveness was premature, warning that it sent the wrong signal to criminals everywhere. Late-night hosts replayed the clip, some mocking the accused's stunned expression, others marveling at Erika's composure. Celebrities weighed in, their tweets carrying millions of impressions. A popular actress wrote, "This woman just taught me more about strength than any role I've ever played." An activist countered, "Forgiveness doesn't mean accountability disappears. Justice must still be served." Musicians posted clips of her statement with their own lyrics about healing layered underneath, turning the moment into art as well as commentary. Athletes dedicated games to her husband's memory, wearing patches with the word "forgive" stitched onto their uniforms. In churches, the ripple was immediate. Sermons across the country reoriented themselves overnight. Pastors pointed to Erika as living testimony that faith could withstand even the fiercest storm. Congregations wept as clips of her courtroom moment played on projector screens, her words echoing through sanctuaries. But not every faith leader agreed. Some challenged the message, urging that forgiveness should not erase the demand for justice. Even in houses of worship, Erika's statement became a dividing line, forcing people to wrestle with where compassion ended and accountability began. Community debates mirrored the national divide. In coffee shops and living rooms, people replayed the clip on their phones, pausing mid-conversation to argue. Some saw her as the embodiment of the immigrant dream, a woman who had faced unimaginable loss, yet still clung to the values of grace and dignity her parents had taught her. Others shook their heads, saying forgiveness was a luxury only those untouched by violence could romanticize. The conversations were raw, emotional, unfiltered. For young people especially, Erika became a flashpoint. College students organized discussion circles about restorative justice, forgiveness, and the limits of mercy. High schoolers shared her words on TikTok, pairing them with captions like, "This is power," or "I could never." Her clip became a digital Rorschach test. What you saw in her act revealed more about your worldview than about the event itself. And through it all, Erika herself remained largely silent, declining interview requests, refusing to become a pawn in the media frenzy. That silence only deepened the intrigue. In an age where everyone rushes to explain themselves, her refusal to elaborate felt almost defiant, as if her words in court had been enough. As if they were meant not to be analyzed to death, but to be sat with, wrestled with, lived with. The accused's reaction also fueled endless speculation. Some claimed to see tears in his eyes. Others insisted it was only fatigue. Analysts dissected his every movement, his slouched posture, his lowered head, searching for signs of remorse. Could Erika's words have pierced through his hardened shell, or was he simply stunned by her refusal to give him the satisfaction of hate? The uncertainty only added another layer of drama to a narrative already bursting with tension. By the end of the week, the story was inescapable. From the Sunday shows to neighborhood barbershops, everyone had an opinion. Some said Erika's forgiveness was the most American act imaginable, the refusal to let violence dictate destiny. Others claimed it was naive, even dangerous, a surrender masquerading as strength. But regardless of perspective, the impact was undeniable. She had forced the nation into a conversation it had been avoiding, one about who we are when the unthinkable happens, and what we owe each other in the aftermath of violence. In the storm of debate, one truth began to shine through. Forgiveness, far from weakness, is a strength few dare to grasp. Erika Kirk had stood in the most harrowing moment of her life, staring at the man accused of taking her husband, and she chose not to let hatred consume her. In doing so, she redefined what power looks like in a nation too often addicted to vengeance. Her act challenged the reflex we are taught, to fight hurt with hurt, to demand a pound of flesh for every wound inflicted. Instead, she showed that forgiveness is not surrender but defiance. It is the refusal to let another's violence dictate your soul. To forgive in such a moment is to say, "You do not get to write the ending of my story." That takes more courage than rage could ever muster. And isn't that the very lesson America needs? If Erika could forgive in the face of death, what is stopping us from forgiving in the face of division? Our politics drip with resentment. Our communities fracture under suspicion, and we cling to grudges as if they were lifelines. But what if they are chains? What if the real act of patriotism is not to dig deeper trenches, but to lay down the first bridge? Her forgiveness does not erase the demand for justice. It elevates it. Justice, she reminds us, is not revenge. It is dignity, order, accountability. But forgiveness clears the heart so justice can be pursued without poison. By forgiving, Erika did not absolve the accused. She absolved herself. And in doing so, she gave us all a glimpse of what moral freedom looks like. There is a reason her words struck such a nerve. Because deep down, we crave a story where light does not bow to darkness, where compassion is not eclipsed by cruelty. Her voice in that courtroom was not just her own. It was a whisper to every person carrying the weight of betrayal, grief, or bitterness. A whisper saying, there is another way, and that whisper becomes a question, pressing on each of us. If she could forgive the unforgivable, can we forgive our neighbors, our rivals, our own family? Can we choose to break cycles of bitterness before they break us? Her story is not just about a trial. It is about a nation asking itself whether grace can still guide us, or whether we will let anger define our destiny. Erika Kirk will not be remembered only as a widow in a courtroom. She will be remembered as a mirror held up to America, forcing us to confront who we are at our core. Her choice reminds us that dignity can triumph over bitterness, that faith can outlast fear, and that grace can silence vengeance without raising its voice. Erika Kirk looked into the storm and answered with forgiveness. In a nation where headlines often glorify outrage, she chose a different script. Her words reminded us that even in the darkest valley, dignity can shine brighter than vengeance. And in that courtroom, with the eyes of the country upon her, she showed us what true strength looks like. This is not just her story, it's ours. Because the truth is, we all walk through storms. Maybe not as public, maybe not as tragic, but storms nonetheless. And in those storms, we face the same choice, to let bitterness write our ending, or to rise above it with grace. Erika's act forces us to ask ourselves, which will we choose? If this story moved you, it's because deep down we all crave something greater than hate. We crave dignity. We crave justice without cruelty. We crave the kind of courage that refuses to bow to fear. That's why her words echo so powerfully, not just as testimony in a trial, but as testimony to the human spirit. And now, it's in our hands. Share this story. Tell it at your dinner table. Post it on your feed. Let it ripple beyond this moment. Because every time we amplify voices of grace, we weaken the grip of bitterness. Every time we honor forgiveness, we strengthen the backbone of our shared humanity. If you believe America is capable of more than division, if you believe we can be a people defined not by what we destroy, but by what we heal, then join us. Subscribe, stay with us, and be part of this movement, because Erika Kirk has shown us the way, and it's a way we cannot afford to ignore.